Hey everybody, welcome to the Goot Reaction. I'm Joe Goot, your host, and with me is my main man from the Midwest. And this week we're going to be talking about the America First Policy Institute and why you should care, and a little bit about who they are, what their agenda is, how they could potentially influence this upcoming Trump second administration. And so let's get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and read the AFPI's mission statement first, just to give you their official about us kind of thing. So, the American First Policy Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan research institute. AFPI exists to advance policies that put the American people first. Our guiding principles are liberty, free enterprise, national greatness, American military superiority, foreign policy engagement in the American interest, and the primacy of American workers, families, and communities in all we do. So that's their little spiel there. And on the team, you might know some of these names. Linda McMahon is actually the chair of the board, and of course she has been nominated to be Secretary of Education by Trump. We've got Larry Kudlow, who is a famous financier, Wall Street guy. We've got Brooke Rollins, who is the president and CEO, and she just happens to have been picked for Trump's Secretary of Agriculture. Let's see. We've got a few other people here. Let me see if I can find some other names. Most people don't know. A lot of white folks. Let's see here. Those are kind of the big names anyway. There are a lot of people on this website. I'm just looking at their AmericanFirstPolicy.com just to review the leadership team, and then they have it broken up into the leadership chairs of the individual committees in the organization. So, for example, Pam Bondi is the chair for their Center for Litigation and Law, and so of course she has been nominated to be Trump's next AG. Let's see here. Well, there's a little bit of diversity here and there. Okay. That's a little surprising.
I thought Matt Gaetz was nominated for AG. Isn't that what we talked about last time? You want
to? Oh yeah. Speaking of that, yeah. Basically, the last episode we recorded at the time, he was the pick for AG, and some, a little bit of outrage over some of his extracurricular activities, and so he is no longer the pick. So we've got Pam Bondi as the nominee right now.
The Dems were going to get that House investigation report to come out, right? Department of Ethics or whatever. The ethics.
House Ethics Committee. Yeah. So whether we see that or not, that'll be interesting. I hope we do, just for the sake of transparency. And also, I did see one thing. I saw it on Blue Sky. Blue Sky, which I joined recently, which is an amazing alternative to Twitter. Very open, supportive, and non-trash community over there.
I was listening to a podcast the other day. They were talking about that, and very good things to say. And the podcast was the Weekly Skews, Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forrester. Mark Agee in that one. We're talking about different times I know it was Corey Ryan Forrester. Sorry, shout out to all those guys. I love that whole redneck group, liberal redneck. Anyway, Corey Ryan Forrester was talking about how different posts he would make to Twitter about Trump would get no reactions, no likes or anything from anything he did, but he'd do some of the same things over on Blue Sky, and he'd get all kinds of reactions. Both sides. It's just he was trying to make the case that he didn't even think Twitter was like distributing it out. It was like blocking content, negative about Trump, which goes along the lines with some of the stuff we were talking about last time too.
Yep. Yeah. And here's another one, by the way. I thought there was only a handful of AFPI members who were picked for the cabinet, but also there's Lee Zeldin. I didn't have him on my list. Somehow I missed him. He's been tapped to head up the EPA. So that gives us overall, just a quick recap here. Linda McMahon for the Department of Education, Pam Bondi, Attorney General, Brooke Rollins for Department of Agriculture, Scott Turner for Housing and Urban Development, and then, like I said, I just saw that Lee Zeldin is also a member of the AFPI, and so he's been nominated for EPA. So that's 5 different members that have affiliation with or have leadership roles in the AFPI that we know about here. And then, we also have Paula White Kane, who I believe is Trump's spiritual advisor, and she's the chair for the Center for American Values at the AFPI. So it's good to know that they've got her on board for her prophecies and divine intervention that she brings to the table. That's good to know. So that's a little bit of the what and the who so far. And so they have an extensive agenda and listed on their site, and they're very, just like with Project 2025, they're very out there with it, even though they may not like to really talk about it a lot and publicize it or take credit for it or what they put out there, but they put out their policy positions, and I've got to be honest, like they're not all concerning. There's some things that they actually, that I do believe America First stands for, that that are not concerning, that actually there's some merit to, and we'll get to those. They're kind of sprinkled through. I didn't create a separate section for the what I consider to be good stuff versus bad stuff. I'm just putting them all together here, but there are some things that I do agree with, actually. As with almost any think tank or policy position, there's subtleties, there's nuances, and there's things that are both good and bad. So we'll take a look at everything.
And sometimes the ideas aren't bad. It's about how they want to execute them, right? It's the
Yeah,
idea to
true,
actually
true.
implement the solution, which is again something we touched on at some point along the way, which is left and right. The concerns are not are a lot of them in common and are usually not far off from each other. But
Hmm.
it's what people think the right solution is for those that really, I think, divides more than the concerns. And it's like you'd think if the concerns are the same, it'd be easier to find common ground. I think
Yeah,
I think the powerful know that, and I think that's why Trump. I mean, what is one thing Trump has tried to do from the very beginning? He's tried to divide everybody, right?
yeah,
And his and
yeah.
his side will try to talk like he's the most unifying president we've ever had. All you got to do is join the cult, right? I mean, then everybody will be unified. But his one he's never hesitated to talk bad about the left, as if they're the evil, as if they're the cause of all problems, if and more so than any president before him that I remember. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So like I say, I think
yeah.
that's all intentional to make sure we don't focus on those common problems. Where maybe if we sat down and talked, we might come to solutions we could compromise on. But it's got to be division, or he doesn't have his power.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's so much of attacking the people rather than the ideas or discussing the ideas that are there, and that just, yeah, that leads to more division, less actual problem solving, and not really where we want to be. So, all right. So there's a number of different policy areas or pillars, I should say, that they have on their site, and I think really quick before we get into those, I did look into some of Pam Bondi's writing and some of the briefs she's filed in on behalf of Trump and other people in various cases throughout the years. She's been attorney general for, I believe, 2 terms now down in Florida, and she's been a longtime Trump supporter. The big controversy right now is which feels actually kind of quaint considering some of the other controversies around it, some of his other picks. But back when Trump University was being investigated, there were some states that were doing the investigations, and basically what'll happen is oftentimes different states attorney generals will combine together and then launch either a co-investigation or a um, lawsuits to address corruption or fraud or whatever it may be, but that goes across state lines. So there was, I believe, in New York investigation started, and they were trying to get Florida to come in as well, because there were actually a lot of Florida residents that were impacted by Trump University scam. And so they were really hoping to get Florida on board. And with Pam Bondi as the AG, she expressed some interest in that. And she said that they were going to look into it and potentially jump on board. And then Trump and his team made a $25,000 donation to Pam Bondi's campaign. And next thing you know, basically she ghosted New York, New York's AG. And there was no follow up to the case, and Florida never joined the suit against Trump University. So, and we all know how that turned out anyway. There was still Trump had to pay something 25 million in a settlement for that case, and so he still got held accountable for that, but maybe not at the level that it could have been had Florida joined in with, again, a lot of additional victims residing in Florida. So that's kind of the current scandal with her. But I just wanted to bring up a couple quick things. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that so far.
Yeah, real quick. I think it's worth a reminder to people why he got in trouble for Trump University, right? And if you mentioned it, I didn't catch it, but you mentioned
no, I don't think I mentioned that part of it. No.
Yeah, he was basically scamming people, right? He was promising them, all these billions of dollars they were going to make as a real estate investor if they studied through Trump University. It was all a big scam. People, he's been scamming you forever. I mean, the Trump Foundation got in trouble as a charitable organization. Trump University. I think there were a couple others I can't think of off the top of my head, but I saw a thing the other day, or actually, this morning maybe, that Gibson Guitars is suing because Trump is making Trump guitars, and they look a couple of the models look just like a Les Paul. Yep. So Gibson's suing for image and likeness, or whatever the legal terminology is, but he's selling them for an unsigned one, if I remember the numbers right, an unsigned guitar for like $1,250, but a signed one for $40,000.
Ugh.
Or something insane like that. Just because it's got his name on it, guys. Stop letting him take you for a ride like this.
Yeah. That's just another way to launder money, like with the watches, the $100,000 watch that's just a joke of a watch. It's
the sneakers,
a gaudy piece of crap. Yeah.
Everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and you mentioned the foundation. I think, if I remember correctly now, this is just off the top of my head, so I apologize if this isn't accurate, but what I think I heard was that he used his foundation to pay the $25,000 to Pam Bondi's campaign. So I think that's where the two of those are connected. That may not be accurate. So I
don't think you had mentioned the foundation at all. Okay,
right.
But that's interesting. Further, I brought it up because it got in trouble, but it's even a more interesting connection. So, that's what he was getting in trouble for with the foundation, was he wasn't actually donating to anybody. He was lying and saying, "Here, donate to the Trump Foundation to help charity or causes or whatever," and he was just using the money however he wanted.
Yeah, it was just a slush fund for his various side projects and donations and political corruption and stuff. So
at least now he's just straight up asking people to send him money.
Right?
That's a little more honest.
Right.
Here, donate to my. Well, except for the fact, do you remember that story probably about a year ago, maybe, where people were, clicking on the website or wherever or in the email reply, whatever they were doing to donate.
Mhm.
and it was automatically checking the box for recurring donations,
Oh yeah.
even though the person wasn't. So these people were getting
Hmm.
charged over and over and over and over again, like monthly donation, or it might even have been more frequently. But
Yeah.
the campaign was doing that automatically to try to screw people and take more money out of their
Yeah.
accounts. You know what I mean? Like, come on, just
Which I guarantee is an FCC violation
it's got to
and
be.
election, if nothing else, an
Yeah,
election violation or election law. Yeah.
yeah.
And most people probably didn't realize it until months later.
Well, that's
You
what the
know?
story. That's what the story was
Yeah.
about. I mean, I guess it'd be nice to have enough money you don't realize that much is leaving it might not have been huge
Yeah. Like
donations. It might
10,
not have.
$10 or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
some people I heard it was there was a fairly sizable amount that they donated, thinking they were doing a one time donation, and then you're
Right.
just taking more money out of your accounts without
Sheesh.
your permission.
Classic.
Sorry, I keep diverting you from
Yeah,
that.
no, it's all right. All right, so let me get to this real quick here, and then we can move on. So, um, yeah, I mean, with Bondi as the AG, if she gets through, we're going to definitely see AFPI policies and definitely a complete fealty to Trump. So that could mean a lot of bad things, of course. And here's a few of the things that she did recently. One was she advocated for throwing Fani Willis off Trump's Georgia election interference case. She sued Arizona to make it easier for citizens to try to intimidate voters, and of course, couched it in free speech. She wants to require proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote, and she and her colleagues made a big deal about all the illegals out there and how they're probably going to vote and stuff. And it's like there's already federal law that prohibits uh, non-citizens from voting anyway. So just to make a big deal out of that is just theater. And then finally, she filed a friend of the court brief arguing to keep Trump's Title 42 authorization in place, which Biden overturned a couple years ago. So yeah, so that's just a handful. There are more things to be concerned about, but I just wanted to give you a quick flavor for some of the things that she stood up for or filed briefs on behalf of her various associates and colleagues, or in her interests or AFPI's interests. So there is that. Any thoughts on any of those ones?
It sounds about like a resume I would have expected. Um, I do
Uh-huh.
I do remember seeing some clips recently of her, yeah, clear back to like 2015, 2016, advocating for Trump. And you mentioned she's from Florida too. I've heard
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of, well, I mean, if you look at the offices where a lot of these people in his cabinet were coming from, there's a heavy Florida influence
Mm-hmm.
as well as a heavy,
Mm-hmm.
AFPI.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of Florida, not one of my favorite states for a lot of
No.
reasons, but
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, Florida, AFPI, billionaires, television personalities, and sexual predators and/or sexual predators.
yeah, it's interesting
So
to hear, a lot of the reaction lately. Oh, they didn't Trump campaign group or whoever's advising him transition. The not transition. Yeah, transition team.
yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
transition team. Yeah, Howard
sorry.
Lutnick and those guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whoever's picking helping him pick a lot of these cabinet picks. They're surprised they found out. Pete Hegseth had issues in the past. With women. And it's like, doesn't it seem like that's who he's naturally just kind of gravitated to at this point? I mean, like, you could be,
Right.
maybe that's the first thing you should look for.
Right.
you know? Um,
Well, again, it makes you wonder if that's just sort of a natural thing. Like he sniffs that out and he's like, ooh. He's like, hanging out with Epstein all those years, and just is that who he gravitates to normally, or is it also part of the thing so he can say, hey, look, I'm not the only sex pest in this administration, and look, the cabinet's full of them. It's like, well, yeah, you picked them, and so that way is he providing cover for himself a little bit too, even if it's subconsciously.
maybe, maybe. I think, and I certainly don't want to put all people that have these characteristics in the same category. But I think what he is attracted to is that ego, charisma,
The macho crap.
presence. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's why like we've said, a lot of his how he's picking people is he's watching TV appearances on all of them to see how they present.
Mm-hmm.
There might be more to it than that, but I think maybe there's a commonality in those attributes, and then your likelihood to treat women like you know uh, they're there for your use. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wonder if there's it's maybe not that specific thing, but just with these other characteristics, and the other maybe tends to follow in a lot of situations.
Yeah. And then, of course, people that are good at covering that kind of stuff up, like Bill Barr and Jim Jordan and Linda McMahon, and it's not just the perpetrators, but the enablers and cover up experts as well. So, all right, so let's dive in here to the AFPI policy pillars, and there are. Let me just double check here real quick. Um, there are, let's see, 10 pillars that are listed on their website, and we're going to only go through about half of those. Yeah, I'm kind of summarizing some of the things. So if you're interested, definitely check out their website. I mean, if you also want to go in deep on this, go to the website, see what they write in their own words. It's basically broken down into kind of each section has a long form introduction where they go into more depth about how they get to their policy positions and things, and then they have some, which in my opinion are a lot of dubious stats and facts and figures that I believe are in many cases just fully taken out of context or pulled from polling that is very suspiciously worded. So take that, in my opinion, take that stuff with a grain of salt. But then they also have their bullet points of policy positions for the federal level and policy positions for the state level. So what I did was, rather than read through all the long form stuff, I kind of bounced in and out of that just because I only had so much time to work on this. But there's a lot of interesting stuff just in the policy points, and then reading through some of their justification as well. So yeah, like I said, though, if you really are interested in this, I encourage you to check it out in their own words. Don't just take our word for it necessarily, but this is a good summary, and highlights some of the things that, again, some of the things I'll agree with and most of the things I won't. But we're going to be looking at, and then again, these are my words here, a section and other policy pillars on ending inflation, on healthcare, freedom, equality, and self governance, um, making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and fighting government corruption, as well as education. So, because we're transitioning from talking a little bit about the cabinet picks, one of those being Linda McMahon for the education secretary, I figured we could dive into education first. And so these are some of the policies that they advocate for that could impact schools and parental rights. So they are in favor of laws that prevent trans kids from participating in sports, which of course they pretty much position that as protecting girls from men playing in women's sports. And then laws that prevent gender affirming care for kids under 18. And I think also in with those would be laws preventing kids from attending drag shows. Um, so the drag show thing, I mean, I don't know. Are you going to have, like, I don't understand how you're going to enforce that really. And as well as, I think that's, they always talk about small government, being a conservative organization, they want small, efficient government. And that is social big government if I've ever seen it. And then with the gender affirming care for kids under 18, preventing that, they're even talking about hormones or puberty blockers and things like that. So again, you're telling parents you're, as with a legal mechanism to tell parents what they can and can't do in their own homes with their own children, um, regardless of the circumstances. You're saying that they're advocating for outlawing that altogether. And then trans kids from participating in sports. I think that should be much more of a case by case basis. I don't think there should be laws around that. It's such a tiny population of um, the scholastic sports anyway. And I think there's some cases where it makes sense, and some cases where there probably should be some changes to rules, or looking at some restrictions. But overall, I think that should be a case by case basis handled in school districts, not at the federal level. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't feel like those had a lot to do with education. Any one of
Well,
them.
school sports. So, like high school sports,
I mean, I
they're
get it.
talking about with the trans kids and under 18, because they're also talking about the Trump's excuse me, Trump saying you can send your kid off to school and they come back as a different gender, and after getting a terrible surgery at school and stuff. And so I
Yeah,
think
no.
that's the reason why I bundled all those together under education, is that they set the policies at what happens at schools, and a lot of that stuff relates back to that kind of stuff. So
No, I get it. I get why it's under that. I'm just saying, what does it have to do with education? Like, how about how you're going to bring grades up? How are you going to
oh
prepare
yeah,
people better, prepare kids better for the real world?
you
The
mean like
things
why
like,
is it a priority for them
yeah,
under
yeah,
the education section? Yeah,
yeah,
okay, I got you.
yeah.
I got
Sorry,
you.
I should have asked that question
No,
better.
I totally got it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I agree with they say there's like, I don't know, like two cases in some of the states where the senators or governors are really big on the whole trans thing,
Mhm.
in sports. And I mean, let's be honest. And I mean this in the utmost respect, but of the people I've met and the lives they want to live. But I haven't met a lot of like real butch, like when men want to be women, it's usually because they're pretty effeminate. Not saying all cases across the board. I'm just saying, like I said, the experiences I've had, they're usually pretty effeminate. They're not out there. They just want to live. They just want to live their lives as a female. They're not. Maybe they're a hair stronger than some of the girls they'd be competing with, but it's not like it's like you got Mike Tyson out there, boxing, Chris Rock or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not that big of a deal. I completely agree what you said. Case by case basis. Look at the safety of the other people involved. If it
Mhm.
doesn't matter, um, I don't say it doesn't matter. If it's not going to put any harm, then let it go. Come on. I mean, I think back, um, when we were in school, uh, there was no girls soccer team, so we had a girl that would play
Yeah.
on the high school team for years, and I didn't
Yep.
hear anybody going, "Oh, don't let her play because she might get hurt." And in that case, there was one girl on a field of 22 athletes, not one guy who wants to be a girl on a field of, with 21 other females, and you're worried
Right.
about the safety of those females. Nobody said anything. And I know ours was just an example, but that's happened all over for a long time until there was as many girls sports as the girls would compete with the guys. I didn't hear anybody having a big hissy fit then. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it was a case by case basis. The schools handled it how they handled it. So let's just cut all the bullshit. And it's because you don't like people who want to live, think they want to live. Sorry, I don't even mean to say
Yeah.
think. They identify as the opposite gender they were born at. That's what you have an issue with. Stop making it about anything else. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. It could be so much down to just common sense and letting the cases play out, and having just common sense discussions with the parents and the athletes. And, like you mentioned, with the example of the high school soccer team. And I played with her for 2 years on the soccer team, and no no one had any problem with it whatsoever,
And,
and it worked fine. She was talented enough to compete with the guys at that level, and so she played at that level. And she didn't ask us to be treated any differently. She didn't want to be treated any differently. She's like, I just want an opportunity to play at a high level so I can hopefully get into college and play. And that's what she got. And no one thought it twice about it.
Yeah, and I think what bugs me the most, if now that I'm going, what bugs me the most is that there's this implication that like a guy is just doing that so they can go out and dominate and compete, and like
Right.
they're gonna go to that length. Like it's the bad intent implied behind
Mhm.
the decision and the rage around that makes me, I think, the most mad. Why do you have to think that those people that like they're doing it to go out and hurt someone or to dominate in the sport? Like why does it have to be that? It's because you have to associate or you have to associate or implicate an evil, a wrongdoing on that person to justify why you don't like the activity, right? Because you
Mhm.
don't want to admit you just don't like that people want to live, want to
Yeah.
identify as the opposite sex. You just don't like it. Stop bullshitting everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. So, a few other things in their educational policy area would be supporting a parental bill of rights, giving more power to minority opinions on curriculum and books and that kind of thing. And of course, they couch it in the interest of keeping they call it radical gender ideology out of the schools. They also want to promote a patriotic civics education. I don't know why the word patriotic needs to be in there,
It's
but
because they're trying to
just
rewrite
as
history.
yeah, I mean,
I've already
civics
heard,
education is just fine by itself.
yeah, I've already heard examples of that. Like they want to make it.
Hmm.
I heard it even described so far as to like basically if it's something that offends conservatives, then it has to be taken out.
Hmm.
What doesn't offend conservatives at this point?
Right,
I mean,
right, and
nothing offends them more than the truth.
right, right. Like calling out the some of the founding fathers owned slaves, and the Three-Fifths Compromise and things like
Exactly.
that. Like, oh
Those kind
no,
of
no,
things.
that was that's misunderstood.
And any implication that maybe white people didn't behave the best over the years is,
Yeah, yeah,
that can make some hurts or feelings.
yeah. All of a sudden, that's problematic. And the exceptional nature of Western civilization, based on what they're basing their this particular pillar around is the 1776 Commission, which I honestly didn't have an opportunity to look into yet. That's another area that if you're looking to do a more deep dive into this, check out the 1776 Commission, in the realm of civics education and what type of angle we're going to be pushing history into our schools. And then I think the big one, or really two here, one is kind of going after teachers unions, which conservatives have had a boner for teachers unions for years, introducing merit pay for teachers and removing tenure. So again, I think that's just a way for them to try to dismantle the seniority structure at teachers unions. And then I think the biggest one is pushing for school choice, which is just really trying to move public school money to private schools and especially religious schools. So I think that's a policy that conservatives have been pushing for decades now, and I believe that's part of their long-term strategy is to really go after um, the institution of public education and underfund it, undercut the resources at every level, and then say, "Oh, it's not working. You bet. You should have a choice to go to a private school if you want to." Well, what happens when you're in the middle of rural Arkansas and you've got just the one public school and that's being defunded and stripped of its resources, and yet there aren't any private schools around to pick up the slack? What are you going to do? So anyway, so we could go
Well, not
on and
only
on about that for a long
yeah,
time, but that's one of the big pieces
well,
of their of that
not only
education pillar.
sorry,
Go ahead. Yeah.
not only that, but the implication that private school is necessarily better.
Right.
Private
Or
schools,
charter schools or,
well,
any of those things. Yeah. That's a
don't
different ball of wax too, right?
charter schools is a whole different racket.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, that's its whole thing. But even private schools, I mean, if you pay enough, I guess if you pay enough tuition, if the school is wealthy enough that they can actually go buy or go out and hire the best teachers around, if that's a true thing, then sure, I suppose you could actually providing a better education experience. To me, private schools always felt like it's what are you trying to get away from,
Hmm.
right? You don't want to mix in the same student body
Hmm.
as you might get at a public school. Um, you want to cut out the riffraff, so to say. That
Yeah.
to me is felt like it's always been more about why people choose private schools. I mean, there's the religious angle too, which I think that's part of that same argument, right?
Hmm.
I don't want my child to be around those sinners in the
Don't
public schools. You know what I
want to
mean?
have them questioning their doctrine.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that's what always bugs me the most about school choice is like I what I've heard about charter schools in the past. Like almost like a very low attendance rate. They sign kids up for these charter schools and they don't even make sure that they're there. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
so the kids aren't going to school at all, but yet public money that represents them has been diverted from the public school to the charter school. It's all kind of
Hmm.
things like that. Uh, it's just another racket. It's just you said it. Filter in taxpayer money from a public institution into a private institution. That's
Yeah.
the goal of a lot of things associated with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially then when you talk about charter schools, I mean, that's then a purely for-profit motive instead of an outcome-based motive where you are trying to get your constituents the best education that you can. You're really trying to extract the most profit that you can. So just like when we get to healthcare, that's the same story there. So all right, so that's it for the education section. So let's move into where they're talking about ending inflation. And so they're primarily blaming inflation on the American Rescue Plan and big government spending and waste. They say that corporate greed really played no part in inflation, and of course, I think when a lot of this stuff was written, I will give this caveat that I believe that this was either written mostly in 2022, maybe early 23. So when they were saying like, oh, inflation was, less than 2% when, before COVID. And then, as of mid 22, it's, 8% or whatever. And so, a snapshot in time, yeah, things look really bad. And like we were heading for a recession and an 8% inflation rate when you're used to, as a country for decades, somewhere in between 2 and 4%, that's a huge shock. And so I just want to mention that just to give them a little grace that, when they're writing this, it seemed like inflation wasn't going to be going down anytime soon. And so what they're picking on are the policies of the middle of Biden administration not being able to address inflation yet. And they do talk about the Inflation Reduction Act a little bit and how that was, a mistake. And again, just more government spending and stuff without really solving anything. But as we've seen, that actually has had a marked um, impact on inflation since then. And so, again, just to give them, a fair shout that this was written at a time when inflation was still really high. Um,
Yeah, but
yeah,
it doesn't feel like their causes are necessarily right. Like I love how
no,
it's always the American Rescue Plan, but not any of what Trump spent on COVID. Putting his name on checks and stuff during 2020. It had nothing to do with
yeah,
his record amount that he put on the deficit
yeah, the
in his
huge
four
tax
years in
cuts,
office. It's
yeah,
just all of a sudden none of that was a problem. But man, Joe Biden, when he spent that money on the American Rescue Plan, that was it. And if maybe some of the information around corporate greed and how much it impacted, again, it didn't impact inflation, but it impacted the cost that people saw on the grocery store shelves and at the gas pump and things like that. Right? I mean, inflation was one thing, and then a lot of the companies took advantage of that inflation to say, okay, we're going to
hmm
use that as an excuse for raising prices. the same time claiming record profits during that same time. So it's not that it had something to do with inflation. It had something to do with what people experienced in those prices at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that's the key part of it, because if you translate that, companies took advantage of you during that time to say, blame inflation, we're going to raise our prices, and now they don't want to give any of those prices back to anyone. So I
Yeah.
kind of see what you're saying, that, at the point in time, but I think because they may not have known about the corporate greed part yet. All they knew that was trying to, you said like the Inflation Reduction Act and where it was at and its success rate, but also
Mm-hmm.
very narrow, just on the blame side.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree for sure. And that actually makes me think too of how we might be pretty safe in predicting that, like, let's say Trump gets in and puts all his tariffs in place.
The 25 percenters he announced the other day.
Yeah, the 25, maybe plus another 10 on top for China. How many companies are going to take advantage of that? Because people won't know the difference. And, these different percentages and this and that and the trade wars and the counter tariffs back and forth. So companies are going to have a field day with being able to just tack on additional costs on top of the tariffs that they have to pay, and just jack up those costs even further and just say, hey, it was just policy. We couldn't do anything about it. We had to pass on the cost.
Right. Because as again, we said before, and many other places obviously have said, Trump keeps describing these tariffs incorrectly. He keeps acting
Mm-hmm.
like those countries pay the money. The 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 companies importing the goods get charged the tariff. Those companies are going to turn around and pass that on to the consumer, which is going to raise prices, not
Mm-hmm.
lower prices, raise prices, and then to your point, they'll just add any cushion they want in on top of that. Because I mean, who's going to sit down and do the math and go, oh, geez, I was charged, 35% on this good where there should have been a 25% tariff. I mean, nobody's going to sit down and do that. They're
Right.
just going to know what they felt, and there again, companies, it's primed to potentially take advantage of that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, very true. And then you also we will see how the certain different industries or individual companies are excluded from those tariffs. So that's a policy or a prerogative that Trump will have in his policy advisors. Picking and choosing who gets exemptions from tariffs. That'll be interesting to see if, for example, Elon Musk and his dealings with China, if Tesla has no uh, tariffs to pay in all those transactions, and then
I bet the oil companies will
yeah.
be exempt,
Oh yes,
considering,
from the Canadian stuff that he's
yeah,
talking about, we get
yeah,
a ton of oil. Yeah, from Canada.
something like
Yeah,
40% of our supply or something is from
yeah, it's
Canada or
pretty
more.
high. Yeah, because it's the different levels of refined oil, right? It's like the crude versus the light sweet, different types of oil that come out, and so then we pull it in from Canada because we produce a certain type of oil and certain natural gas, uh, qualities and stuff, and then so we're trading back and forth, exporting a lot but importing a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand it right, and I admit I may not, but a lot of it comes down to environmental standards for how dirty the oil
Mm,
and the gasoline can be at the end of the day. So
hmm
when you get back to like the Keystone Pipeline and all the how much that has been used as a political, um, a political ploy over the years, something to be mad about. That Keystone Pipeline was taking tar sands oil from, I believe, everybody look this up, make sure I'm right. Tar sands oil from the up in Alberta in Canada,
hmm
where they're digging up this nasty, disgusting. If you want to see just disgusting images, search for tar sands mining operations in Alberta, Canada, and just the devastation, the disgustingness. It's I don't mean to sound like some tree hugger, but man, it looks like a wasteland of just pollution, and it's disgusting. Anyway, this stuff is really thick, really um, you know, heavy crude, they're using the Keystone Pipeline to send that down to the Gulf of Mexico where it can get refined and exported because it will not be clean enough for our use here. Now, obviously, there must be other oil in other parts of Canada where it does meet the standards we want. But as you think about a Trump cabinet, what is going to happen to those environmental standards?
Right.
Okay. What that may mean is that we do start burning dirtier gas. We do start accepting that, into the United States. It could mean, theoretically, if I play this out, it could mean more available supply. But I went through that in the post-election episode. There's no way that's going to happen. There was an interesting Washington Post article this week that talked about the same thing, that said, hey, Trump, oil company saying, Trump, slow your roll on that drill baby drill thing because we don't want to do it because it'll, increase our supply and cut into our profits. So we don't want to do it. So just remember, you heard it from your boy, Triple M, on, the post-election episode, I think it was, telling you how that was going to work. Anyway, back to my point. It could mean, like I said, again, dirtier oil, is able to be used in the United States, burned. It just went through. It's not gonna result in lower prices for you. They will control the supply. It does mean potentially more oil from Canada, which means if we're talking about those tariffs, that's just going to raise the price of everything. Maybe they'll get the exemptions, folks. I mean, I'm not saying root for corruption, but you better hope they do, because otherwise your gas prices are going to go up, not down. I believe it was a campaign promise. Lower gas prices. Anyway, I hope that all made sense. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, you're good. Yeah, I get it for sure. All right, let's see what else we got here. Wants to deregulate businesses to allow them to grow, which that's a standard conservative line for sure. They want to place work requirements for any federal safety net benefits. So that basically means just trying to save money for the federal government by denying benefits to more people that are already getting them. They also seem to believe that the Biden administration is waging a war on energy production, which we kind of just talked about, and we have talked about multiple times that the U.S. is energy independent right now, and we export far more oil than we ever have before. So we are in a position where we are fine on energy, and I don't think Biden, much to the chagrin of the green folks out there, that he's got us in a great spot with oil production right now. So
yeah, more land leased, available.
Yeah,
that's available to the oil companies. Again, if we talked about why they're not drilling on it, because they don't want to lower their own prices. I just repeated something from a second ago, but guys, I hate, like I said, I even hate to say the words, do your own research, but you gotta think about this stuff, because their lines on, Joe Biden having this war on oil production only works because you believe it. Understand what's going on and don't believe it anymore, and then these lies won't be as effective.
Yep. Another interesting thing is, of course, they want higher unemployment, is that they feel like the Fed should focus on price stability rather than full employment, which they word it rather fancifully, and they're not outright saying, hey, we think unemployment should go up, but that's basically what they're advocating for, because they want stable prices, and they would rather have people lose their job, millions and millions of people lose jobs in order to bring inflation down, rather than price instability based on the Fed's raising interest rates. So they'd rather trade millions and millions of American jobs for lower interest rates. So that's where they're at on that. And then finally, real quick.
Yeah. So, what's the math on that, of how higher unemployment affects prices?
I think in general, it's just the quantity of people that don't have enough to spend. So really, you're just lowering demand by putting people out of a job. And so then you have people that have less income, and so they have less spend flooding into the marketplace on goods and services, and then with less demand, the inflation comes down.
So in a way, in a consumer economy, we actually want less demand. It's kind of
If we
a
don't have enough supply, yeah. If for whatever reason supply, as you know, during after COVID, supply chain was wrecked, and that really impacted the supply side. So the demand side then started to go back up, and that's where the imbalance happened, right? So just explaining this to everybody in a simple way. And so now that unemployment is at or near record levels and has been great under the Biden administration for so long, that means more people with more money to spend, and supply hasn't totally caught up or outstripped demand yet. So that's why we're still seeing high prices on things, even though inflation has come down to acceptable levels. That's one of the main reasons why that was high for so long.
And then why does high unemployment necessarily mean that there's... So you think it's just a matter of there being less, like a certain number of people have jobs and salaries and wages, and then a certain number of people don't, and it's okay.
I think they literally think it's that. I think it's that simple in terms of at the macro level, right? Not getting out in the weeds, but yeah.
I'm gonna add a layer to it. Something I've thought about, and I don't know if this is official in any economics books, but when unemployment is high and more people are looking for jobs, then it's people competing for the open positions, right? Which gives bargaining power to the people holding the open position.
Right.
When unemployment is low, it's less people in more. Usually when unemployment is low, actually, don't we usually see that the economy is doing pretty well, right?
Yes.
Which means, so that
usually correlates to higher wages and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because when there's more job openings and less people, then the companies are now competing for the people, and it puts the people in power.
Yep.
So think about that in relation back to our capitalism episode, right? Are you making decisions that help the rich and the powerful and large corporations, or are you making decisions that help the people? So part of that is why there's also the correlation to what I was saying. When it's higher unemployment, the companies are able to keep the salaries low because they're not competing for the person. The person is competing to get in that role and will take less money. When it's low, the people looking for jobs can have higher demands because the company is more desperate to get them over another company hiring that same person, and it drives wages up.
Yep.
So it's not just the people who have jobs versus don't; it's the actual salaries come down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Or at least don't grow as fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because that shows exactly where their heads are at, right? All they want is cheap access to money, and they don't care how many unemployed people are out there that have to suffer for that. So they want interest rates near zero. And because I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I don't know how many people have heard about how people like Jeff Bezos and other billionaires get away with really paying almost no taxes, is that they don't live off of salary income. A lot of times they'll have a salary of like a couple $100,000, but they'll get, 80,000 shares of stock. And so they leverage that stock for loans and as collateral, as their stock is collateral, and then they'll just pay the loan back. And with their salary, or they'll sell a few shares here and there. So they effectively are, and the interest rate on those loans is then part of the Fed rate, is based off of the Fed interest rate. So if it's, that's what they're worried about. They're worried about cheap access to money, and they don't care about, lowering wages or increasing wages for their employees. They don't care about any of that stuff. They don't care about how many people are unemployed or not. They're really just interested in cheap money. So.
Yeah, definitely. There was on one of the conversations, and again, I listened to like 2 or 3 of them today. Again, the well-read comedy guys, Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forster, were talking about, and I'm shouting them out a lot tonight. Love those guys. We're talking about how, Elon was kind of a darling of the left for a long time because he was making green cars and he was, um, you know, electric cars. I mean, being green, and when he really seemed to turn was during COVID, when the state of California is telling him to keep all his employees at home, and he's like, "Hell no, I need to, keep production," because he was on the cusp of some like large, sales mark or something like that, and it was like when it came down to the money, man. He showed you exactly who he was. Something else I wanted to touch on there real quick, talking about Biden's economy, and we've touched on before the idea that prices were high, but also wages were growing, technically in a lot of cases faster than inflation. We acknowledged not everybody necessarily feels that if you didn't necessarily get a raise, but the reason wages were growing, a big part I believe, is because unemployment was so low, right? Again, a mark of a good economy. Unemployment was very low, so driving people's wages up, but we're not giving Joe Biden's economy any credit for that. We're just blaming him for the high prices. Just supports what we were saying a minute ago, though, about, low unemployment, high wages.
Yep, exactly. All right, so let's move on to another pillar here real quick. We've got healthcare, which they talk about as putting patients and doctors in control. And in this section, actually, there's a number of things that I agree with them on. I think they've got some good ideas here, but in general, they blame big government and well-connected special interests for the high spend in the U.S. healthcare system without as positive of income or as positive of results as would be expected based on the spend. Because if you don't know, the U.S. spends more than any other developed nation as a percentage of GDP, but then the outcomes are markedly worse than other nations, even those with single-payer healthcare systems. They want to get rid of the ACA. Here's one that I kind of agree with. I need to do a little more research into all that this would entail, but they advocate for what they call a direct primary care system, which is almost like a membership based doctor or provider collective. So essentially, you would pay into like a monthly fee. Instead of paying for insurance, you're just paying a monthly fee directly to a set of primary care doctors and maybe some specialists as well. But basically, it's a collective, and you're paying directly for access to most common preventative care, most common basic care, um, through directly through those individual or collective of doctors. And that's at the very local level, you have a bunch of these different collectives that you can choose from. And then one thing that I thought was kind of weird from their perspective, though, is they say you should have those as opposed to the current system that's in place, but they should be exempt from state insurance regulations. So I that's as far as they went with that. They didn't give a whole lot of detail in terms of what if all regulations from the state regulation or regulatory bodies, or just certain ones when it comes to insurance, like there has to be some regulations on those. So like I said, they don't go into a ton of detail on that, but I just in general I like the idea of small collectives of concerns that are aligned, where the patients and the doctors are all aligned in the same goals and that are affordable. So I do kind of like that concept. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a few. I do kind of overall like the idea of that, that last part too. I do worry when I hear that exempt from state insurance regulations, though, because usually, and not to say they're not bastardized by, money that gets spent from lobbyists, but usually regulations are intended to protect people. So when I hear that, where I go to when I hear insurance regulations is probably that, there's probably requirements around what you can decline or not decline. I mean, some of that comes down to, most insurance type things are contracts. In a way, it says what one party's going to do and what the other party's going to do. Health insurance is probably no different. Probably all that stuff you don't read, and then you click accept because you need to, sign it and get going on. Probably lays out what's paid or not paid. And a lot of that's probably governed by a lot of these regulations. So I kind of worry on the other side. Then what, like, I mean, in its purest form, it sounds like, yeah, you pay into this collective, you go to your doctor, you get checked out for whatever you need to. Um, they move you through a process if you need to see another specialist or something. Um, that sounds fantastic, unless, like I said, these regulations kind of come in and restrict what they're able to do, like beyond that primary care. Like, I just find it hard to believe when I've read everything out or you listen to everything else that you've mentioned here that they actually want to cut out the large medical insurance companies, the large, like, how do the large hospital chains fit into this model? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, maybe from a specialist perspective, maybe that could be it, where they have, maybe those local collectives don't have like the MRIs on site or things like that, and so you still need to access specialists and radiologists and other things like that. Maybe they'll just have an X-ray machine and some of the basic equipment, but maybe not the full range of services that a state-run or charity-run hospital system might have, for example.
Yeah, maybe it's a beyond primary care type thing, is where those other, you have cancer, or you need surgery or something, and you go on into the broader hospital system. I mean, I think when you read off those health statistics about how much the U.S. pays versus what our health results actually are, they say a lot of that comes down to access to primary care, being able to go to your doctor and get the simple things checked out, or get on things early. If you're not feeling right in a certain area or whatever, and you go get that cancer screening and realize it's cancer early, and you treat it, and or preventative type stuff when it comes to, like, skin cancer, things getting moles removed and biopsied and stuff. They say a lot of that early detection, in a lot of cases, early care helps people from getting sicker. So if that's the goal, and it means less people do move up the chain through, like, the hospital systems and stuff where they have to get care, then that's great. I love the idea if that's what we're talking about. But I just sit there and go, if there's a lot of money out there that these big hospital chains aren't going to be happy going, hey, you're sending us less patients. You know what I mean? Or we're seeing less people. I don't know. The doctors, I think, might be okay, but I don't know, just the corporations, the entities, the executives, they're not going to be, they don't want to see their profit margins go down, assuming they're for-profit hospitals.
Yeah, a lot of middlemen involved there. And when you think about, prescription drugs and with the pharmacy benefit managers and all those layers of
that's
different
a whole
things.
other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, it does seem like some of these policy positions that they have are very much pro-business and pro-free enterprise and anti-regulatory. And some of that's has snuck in, even into the healthcare stuff, like we were just talking about with the state insurance regulations. But like in general, I think some of these policy ideas are pretty good, and they seem kind of counterintuitive compared to the rest of their overall flavor of their other ideas. But
it's like we said early on too. Sometimes the idea is good; it's the execution of it. How's it actually going to play out? How's it actually going to get implemented? That's where sometimes the dirty details lie.
Yep. They also want more options for HSAs and HRAs, which I also think is good. I think HSAs is a pretty popular thing out there, and I know that that's a good way to utilize pre-tax dollars to help fund healthcare expenses, and they can also be invested. So I think that's also a pretty good option to push for. They're pushing for auto enrollment in Medicare Advantage, which Medicare Advantage is a scheme that George Bush put through that is not what it seems, and it doesn't have anything to do with actual Medicare, even though it's called Medicare Advantage. It's a scheme that is not part of Medicare. So they're pushing for that. And then let me just get a couple other here real quick to get through this section, and then I'll turn it over to you again. Um, they want expanded telehealth options, like access to out-of-state providers, which I think is a good one. I don't think, if especially with telehealth, I don't think you should be restricted to just providers within your state that are licensed just in state. Um, they want more access to preventable care for chronic conditions, because there are a handful. You could probably pick the top 10 chronic conditions in this country and create specific plans and specific um, care for those conditions and make those more available. And then this last one was kind of weird. Then I'll turn it over to you. They want to create disincentives for other developed nations to be able to buy and sell cheaper medicines. And I think that's where you get back to the pro corporate side of these policy positions, where they're like, hey, other countries, stop making us look bad by buying and selling in and out of our country these cheaper medicines that, showing Americans that they can, if they only lived in a different country, they could get the same medication for 30,000% less than what they're paying here in America. So that one's a funny one to me. And that one's just totally pro corporate, pro big pharma, which is in contrast to their other healthcare positions. So I know I threw a lot at you at the end there, but I just wanted to get through the section here before we move on. So
Yeah.
anything you want to add there?
Yeah, it's all right. I was taking some notes here.
Cool.
Boy, the auto enrollment in Medicare Advantage. That one, that's bad news.
Yeah,
that's essentially
downvote on that one.
That's essentially taking Medicare away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
I forget which podcast I was listening to the other day. I want to say it was one of the Bulwarks. They were talking about people saying that they, senior citizens getting called like 15 times in an hour by a certain company, and I can't remember what it's called, but they're trying to get people to enroll in Medicare Advantage, which again, the people get tricked and they think it's something to do with Medicare, and it's not. It's a private company, it's private insurance, it's in most cases worse from a coverage and standpoint for these customers. Oh, and I remember why it was significant that they were talking about it. It's because one of the main companies. Oh, I think it was actually Chris Hayes one night this week was talking about it, talking on his MSNBC show, because one of the primary companies that was doing this one that was calling people 15, 20 times an hour, badgering them basically, and it was run by or owned or heavily invested in by Mehmet Oz, who is been named to run Medicare
and Medicare
by Donald Trump.
God.
So what do you think he wants to do with Medicare? So so this falls right in line with that. Destroy Medicaid, privatize it all. That will not result in better health.
No,
for people out
not
there.
Better outcomes.
Definitely not cheaper.
No.
And then the disincentive for other countries to buy cheaper medicine, man. That's, I guess, if you were going to argue like, okay, we can't control the drug companies, and they want a certain profit on a drug, and because all these other countries are paying less, we're having to pay more, which you could argue we're not having to pay more. We could just regulate better like the other countries do. We could let the government represent us versus the corporations instead of vice versa. But if you're at least making the argument that, well, if the other countries bring their prices up, then you could bring our prices down, and still the drug companies could still make the profit they need to. But do we think that's what would come out of that, or just more profits for the for the drug companies?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm betting on just more profits.
Yeah, and like the HSA and HRA thing, I mean, those are great. They help people save money for medical expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like you said, I believe it's it's pre-taxed money. I think they're allowed to put aside, or taxes don't apply to it, or something. There's some tax implication on it. But
yeah,
what I didn't hear a lot is in here about bringing the costs down at all.
Right. Nothing around that for
Yeah.
sure.
So we'll help you save your money. So
Except
you
for
could.
maybe the direct primary care, because that would be at least
Oh yeah,
on the
yeah, yeah,
front end a little bit. Um,
yeah. You'd be
lower
taking the
monthly
insurance
fee.
out of it
Yeah.
a
Right.
bit.
Yeah.
So you're bringing your monthly expense down. I'd be interested to see the fine print on that too. Now that I'm thinking about it, of
Hmm.
what is your copay like when you have to go? You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
exactly. Is it just a monthly fee and that's it? And then it covers these
Yeah.
20 services regardless how often you use them? Or,
Or it's
is it
taking less
like an
money
a
up
la carte
front.
menu? And then, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Or it's taking less
Yeah.
money up front. You got to pay more when you actually go. So
Right.
it's
That could
giving
be
you
too.
access to a
Yeah.
certain network, small network, but it might be more
Yeah.
expensive when you go. So at the end of the day, you're just kind of
Right.
hoping maybe you don't go because you don't want to, you
Right.
don't want to spend that money. So it'd be
Yep.
so now that I talk this out a little more, I wonder if it actually would result in better health incomes because it might still
That's true. Yeah.
how it's implemented might still disincentivize people to go to the doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, I didn't think about that when I first, was looking through that. And it did seem a little suspicious, like it was too good of an idea for them to propose, again, based on the other policy positions they have. So, yeah, makes you wonder.
Yeah, this is why it's fun to start. Just start thinking about it, right? What does it make
Yeah,
any sense
totally.
to and hey, we could be way off on our thoughts here, but
Yeah.
just start trying to peel back the layers and
Yep.
see what you find.
Yep. All right. So let's just do one more here, and then we're already starting to run a little bit long. But I definitely want to get into, let's see, we've got freedom, equality, and self governance. We've got easier to vote, harder to cheat, and then fighting government corruption. I'll let you pick which one of those that you want to dive into as our last one for today.
Sorry, say them again real quick.
Freedom, equality, and self governance. Easier to vote, harder to cheat, or fight government corruption.
Oh, those are tough ones to choose from.
They're all doozies.
Let's go with the fight government corruption because so far what we've talked about in the last two episodes is looks to be a whole lot of it. So
Yeah. So let's see what the America First Policy Institute has to say on fighting government corruption, or as they put it, draining the swamp. They actually use that language in there. So, okay, let's go with fighting government corruption for $1,000. So, one of the first ones is transparency in congressional communications with lobbyists and special interests, which I agree with. I think it's important to know who our lawmakers are meeting with, and who those people represent. I think that would be awesome to if those meetings and minutes were published. I think that would be super cool. So I agree with that one. I also agree with the second one, which is prohibiting Congress from owning or trading individual stocks. That's something that Nancy Pelosi could have pushed through during the first part of the Biden administration, and then she just kept hemming and hawing and blah blah blah, and never always made excuses on why she didn't want to do it. And the Republicans could have also done that during Trump's first term too. So I'm not just blaming the Democrats there, but I think that's a big one because there's tons of insider trading going on, and we've seen evidence of that, and people actually be charged for that. But for the most part, no one really gets held accountable for that. So I think that's a good one to do.
both sides could have done it, and one side might actually have done it. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath waiting for
No. Yeah. Very true.
Republicans to. Sorry. I mean,
No. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Um, This one was interesting, I thought, which was relocate cabinet departments and agencies across the country. And I think that one's in there because they is also part of this to reduce corruption and move things out of being centralized in Washington D.C. For one, the areas around Washington D.C. are super expensive to live in. So if you want the best and the brightest, you might not necessarily get the people that can afford to live in those areas. And so you want to incentivize also the government to be closer to the people. And so as a way to do that, you could literally relocate uh, entire cabinet departments or agencies or split up sub departments at different areas around the country, to help mitigate, one, the cost of living in those areas where those people have to work, but two, actually then to have representation of federal government throughout the nation, and not just in like local FBI offices or local you know banks and things like that. So yeah,
Also,
so I don't know.
maybe,
I kind of agree with that too, actually.
yeah, maybe put like the Department of Agriculture out in the Midwest or even California,
Yeah.
where a lot of our food is grown. I mean, yeah,
Yep.
there's
Yeah.
maybe a little merit there.
Yeah. So I think that's a decent idea. Um, this one was something that Trump started, which was require agencies to cut two regulations for every one new regulation. I think that's just a complete arbitrary rule, and I don't believe in that at all. I don't think regulations are bad in and of themselves. Um, I think that's just a terrible rule, and but that's one of the ones they support.
Well, especially if the
They,
regulations relate to corruption.
yeah,
Don't cut those, because that's
exactly.
what we're trying to do here.
Oh no, wait, but you got one new one in, so you have to cut the two ones about corruption, and then to replace the one that's the new one. So they do want to essentially implement Schedule F for the civil service, which is one of the one of the classics that have come out of Project 2025, which is essentially making all civil service employees at will employment, which means they can be fired at any time for any reason with no recourse. And so they are in favor of that.
That one right there maybe counteracts everything I heard above it.
Yeah, it's a big one. That's a big one for sure. They also believe that there should be no agency rules or guidance without congressional approval. So that would just, I mean, put a huge backlog of stuff in front of Congress. I mean, we all saw how useless this last Congress was. This last, um, Congress headed up by most of the time by Mike Johnson in the House. Imagine if every single regulatory agency couldn't put out any rules or guidance without it going to Congress and having them approve it through, committee hearings and then through a vote, let's say. I mean, could you imagine how that would just grind everything to a halt instantly? And that would be very bad for actually trying to regulate and enforce any regulations, from the experts in the various agencies.
Isn't that part of the whole Chevron doctrine thing?
It's
Wasn't that
very similar. So that's in here as well, where they only want courts to interpret regulations and agency guidance, and then only want courts to decide fines and penalties rather than the agencies themselves. So yeah,
so?
that's
This
the
is the other.
primary.
This is the other side of that.
Yeah,
Then,
it's
right?
another
Like,
another attack on agency expertise and agency power. Yeah. And then this one, this is a classic here too. Finally, they only want political appointees making regulations, not career civil service people. So again, taking regulatory authority out of the hands of the careerists and the experts and the people with the educations and the experience in these various agencies. They only want political appointees to be able to make regulations, which again, then that's just saying you could put anyone in charge. There's no vetting. I mean, we've already seen the Senate's going to be feckless and probably in an advice and consent role in with Trump's appointees. So any of those people can make regulations, but not the career civil service people underneath them. So yeah.
so this is kind of what we talked about last time too. Like the point of putting these cabinet picks in place is not. We talked about how unqualified they are. We talked about few other things related to it, but the main thing is that they're just going to do Trump's bidding. So
Mm-hmm.
again, this is so that Trump can hand his ideas, his thoughts. He's technically running everything, just down through these yes men that are political appointees that head these organizations. It's again, this is an interesting conversation, my friend, because again, if you look at each individual item on that list, you say some sounds good and some sounds bad. But what I'm seeing in almost every one of these is that there's two or three that just negate everything else that's in it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, sure, I don't have to have uh, lobbyists go try to pay somebody off. We did it on the front end, right? Elon and
Mm-hmm.
everybody went ahead and paid Trump to do the things they want him to do. He's just handing that agenda down through his political appointees now. You don't have to go. You don't have to go at the lower levels and try to lobby and try to win things over. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
From
all
the
coming
bottom
down
up.
from the top. And then
Yep.
Schedule F, well, it's the ability to fire people. Okay, right. Well, that's what we've heard about with Project 25, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
2025. Fire all the career civil servants, put your own cronies in place, and now, I mean, like I said, there's a couple things in here that just negate every other good thing you heard on there. And I don't mean just negate it
Yep.
like, oh, there's still some good and some bad. I mean, I think they're going to make some of those good things irrelevant
Yeah.
because there won't be. Yeah, I mean, okay, maybe besides the prohibiting members of Congress from owning stocks,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty much everything else just feels like it gets negated. You can put the Department of Agriculture in the Midwest where there's agriculture, but if you neuter it from being able to do anything and it's just going to do whatever, I forget who the ag person was, but if it's
That
just
would
going to
be
do,
Brooke
oh
Rollins.
yeah, Brooke Rollins, yep.
Yeah.
If it's just going to, do whatever she says anyway, as a potentially, I don't want to say uneducated, but unqualified, person to make those decisions. Like I said, everything
Mm-hmm.
else on that list just gets wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, in general, it's hilarious that that section is all about draining the swamp and fighting government corruption. Uh, Ironic, yeah.
Yeah, and now and let's go back to the healthcare for just a second, because now that I'm thinking about it with this lens, you can talk about if we're going to have these, private pools, then what is the point in automatically enrolling everybody in Medicare Advantage? Because that's private insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So is that only for the things as you move up move up the chain through the healthcare system?
Mm,
I find that hard to believe. So
right.
something about that ties back to this primary direct pool thing, or what you'll see is, oh well, we couldn't quite push everything on our agenda through, so what we had to get rid of was the direct primary system. But
Mm-hmm.
don't worry, we automatically enrolled you in Medicare Advantage. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So it can take, and that right there will pretty much wipe everything else out on that list, as
Right.
far as you know,
Yeah.
how it's going to help you.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting analysis because it does seem like there's some seriously contradictory things in here in each section, as well as some things that just seem rather suspicious in terms of what's their ultimate end goal with these things, and some things that just, yeah, like if they get one or two through, then it negates half the other stuff that's in there that might be some good ideas. So, yeah, very, very suspicious. So again, I almost wonder, again, if I did a little more reading, then there might be some more stuff to uncover, maybe a little more around motives. But in general, I think, they call themselves a neutral think tank, but it's clear that they are, a right wing think tank, and they're pro free enterprise, pro commerce, pro anti regulation. It's a double negative, but or whatever. But yeah, it's a very interesting organization, and we haven't touched on even half the policy pillars. Really, there's definitely more to talk through. So maybe we can touch on some of these other ones on another show. But for now, I think we should call it good here, and let everyone go. So
Oh,
yeah, thanks.
I think I hear a follow up episode coming for those
Follow
other.
up episode, anyone?
Maybe.
Yeah, we definitely have more to discuss. I mean, we didn't even get to
Yeah.
the voting stuff, or the stuff like religious liberty and big tech speech censorship and pro life stuff, and there's a lot more to touch on.
Yeah. Real quick before we say goodbye, just one last thing.
Yeah.
Donald Trump ain't picking anybody that's neutral for his cabinet. So if he's picked
No.
6 people out of this organization already, that right there tells me they are not neutral.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Very true. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for sticking with us. I know this is a little bit of a longer episode. We really appreciate you hanging out and listening to the end here. Like I said, we might do a little bit of a follow up on this. Maybe have it would be one of our bunch of random ass shit episodes and include some of this stuff just to tie a bow on it. But for now, we're going to say goodbye and hopefully you all have a happy Thanksgiving, whether you're just chilling at home or meeting up with family or friends. Enjoy your time. And hey, thanks for spending some time with us. So we'll see y'all next time. Take care.